So, Nigel, you gonna settle down?
Oh my God.
Come on, Nigel, settle down.
When did he settle down?
Okay, I'm kind of hoping that a lot of you have heard of the idea of faith development theories before at some point. Explanations for how the way that we interact with God, with ultimate meaning, with the big questions of life changes in the different seasons of our life. If you have heard of these theories before and you've had them kind of explain the different stages that people go through, you probably felt that whatever your age at the time, you were pretty well developed in your faith. So if you're hearing about James Fowler or more popular versions like Scott Peck's or Brian McLaren's, you'll most likely put yourself or imagine yourself in one of the last couple of stages that they describe, befitting your mature way of living your life of faith. And well, should you. I would expect that everyone in this room has a part of you living inside that resonates with that same kind of mature faith that you might associate with Mother Teresa or Gandhi or Peter Fitch. However, if I described in glowing terms the childlike faith, which after all is much praised by Jesus, that trusts the confidence of a good teacher or parent, you might resonate with that too. And if I described some faith community that was fairly stuck in its understandings, I bet you would cheer on some young hero who questions what is going on and starts to think for herself, leaving the community, at least temporarily, behind. This is because, I believe, all the stages of faith are present simultaneously inside each of us, at least as youth and adults. At times, we all want simple confidence. At times, we all want to stand up for ourselves and question limited understandings. And at times, we all can feel the mysterious paradox that truth is beyond our understanding. In recent years, developmental theorists have seen more and more the weaknesses that are a part of stage theories. Challenges have come from sources such as complexity theory and nonlinear dynamics, so that now we have more complicated models that look like spiral dynamics. Just, that's not my theory, but one day I'll hire an artist to take the model that I describe and turn it into something that looks colorful and beautiful. But we'll still keep finding faith in the old theories as well, though I think the days of what Fowler called himself invariant, sequential, and hierarchical stages are over. I don't think we're going to keep on talking in that kind of language for much longer. But that's how he referred to his theory. Even later on, when he reflected back on his theory, he still held to that idea that they're invariant. In other words, they don't change, they're always in this order, and they're hierarchical. One is clearly better than another. But I think it's a good thing that we're past that stage, because I think that thinking in hierarchical stages, where one stage is clearly better and more advanced than another, will always tend a little bit, at least, toward condescension. Even us condescending toward our past selves, which I think is problematic when we relate to other people who we don't think are quite as well developed as we are. That happens occasionally, that we have that thought. So, very much in brief, I want to introduce a different model of spiritual development that has two main dimensions to it. The first is kind of the directional dimension, and it's the general trajectory toward maturity, which I define as increasing complexity held together by integrity. Okay? Increasing complexity held together by integrity. Everybody experiences an increasing complexity. We can't help it. We accumulate experiences, ideas, concepts, thoughts, feelings. Those of you who are older might recall Bruce Coburn's song, "You Get Bigger As You Go." I always think of that when I think of this idea. It's not easy to hold on to this increasing complexity with integrity. The integrity part is the harder part of that journey. I actually thought of this a lot with Agnes's talk about John Terpstra, how John's voyage in getting to know the voice, going through the illness, is you can see his maturity. He's coming to get a bigger and bigger view of what the body means and how beauty and brokenness are not disconnected but all part of one package. That's the integrity that holds together the complexity that he's talking about. But we don't always manage that. So words like fragmentation might describe how we sometimes get derailed from growing in spiritual maturity when the complexity comes in and breaks us apart. We're not able to hold it together, at least for a while. The other possibility that could happen is rigidification or denial, where we're just so stuck in one way of making sense of the world that we can't adjust to new things that are coming in. And so we just sort of shelve all the new parts of the complexity that we can't hold together with that kind of integrity. So we're stuck. Now, the best maturity for any given individual is to gain complexity at the rate with which they have the resources to maintain integrity. You want me to try that one? I'll try to do that one again. The best maturity for any given individual is to gain complexity at the rate with which they have the resources to maintain integrity. Bigger is not essentially or morally better. It's the fit between complexity and integrity. So the metaphor that I use is Mosaic. And so this is a table that Carol made a couple years ago, taking together a lot of broken pieces and putting it together in one pattern. And so the reason I like the metaphor of the mosaic is it has both elements of integrity in it. There's the integrity of the separate pieces that still speak to where they came from and have their unique characteristics. But there's also the integrity of the whole, the pattern that forms what we might call our self, if we have a self that holds together with all the complexity that we have. Or if I wanted to get into a whole different talk, I might say our community of selves. Some of you know that I like to think of a person as being a community of selves, because there's a lot more than one of us inside. I also thought appropriate for this afternoon that this book is very much a mosaic and very much speaking to the kind of thing that this talks about too. Integrity of a whole bunch of different pieces, somehow, crazily, a bigger integrity that holds the whole place together in all kinds of complexity. And this book is an amazing reflection of it. But we'll hear more about that later. So that's one dimension. The second dimension of the model are facets or themes which become highlighted at various times in our development. In other models, these facets get hardened into stages. So most of the time that we think of what I'm referring to as facets, most of the time are referred to as stages that we're in order, again, in a sequential, hierarchical way. But I like to look at them as facets so that we don't get too firmly identified with those particular themes at one particular place in our life. I'll only be able to tease you with the identity of these facets today because I won't have time to talk about them too long. So here they are. The first one, and these are roughly reflective of the kind of stages that you'd hear in most of the other theories, so or Scott Peck's or wherever. The four main categories would be somewhat reflective of the main kind of themes you'd hear in those stages. The only thing is that I think they're over and over again, that we revisit these themes in our life. So the first one is chaos and order. This first facet centers around responding to cause and effect, to learning the consequences of our actions and those of others. During seasons when this facet is prominent, we give attention to the nature of what is predictable and what is not in the world around us. We explore experiences of justice that at times seem inexorable. By that I mean like karma, that there will be justice one way or another, that kind of idea, the law of sowing and reaping. But at other times we see the lack of it, like where is the justice that we would expect to happen? So that's one facet. The second, love, forgiveness, and community. Our social worlds are always crucial to our well-being, but we need to gain abilities to negotiate our place in these social worlds. We work on forming attachments, loyalties, and commitments, learning us and them. We work on the kinds of skills that enable us to reconcile breaks in a relationship. We find our place in building up cultures and communities. The third one gets a little bit more complicated. The essence of the third one, freedom and change, is our need to see and move beyond the weaknesses of the contexts and systems of understanding in which we find ourselves. Something wasn't quite falling into place as I was conceptualizing this third facet, and then I realized it's because we tend to, I really like the word bifurcate. So anytime I can use that word, I slip it in. So that we tend to bifurcate, go into two different pathways in this particular facet, which a few people like Jesus can hold together really, really well. But most of us tend to go down one road or another in this ability. I think this is kind of an age-old tension that we've asked ourselves: why are the people who are so into social justice and the people who are into a deeply charismatic spiritual life, why are they different? And I think this is one way to explain a little bit of that distinction. So the more common, I think, of the two pathways is revolution and resistance. This subfacet focuses on breaking free from a perceived systemic problem or limitation. We see what's wrong and we name it. We deconstruct things. We resist evil. The slightly less common path is imagination and hope. Some people have the ability to see hope and possibility in the midst of our messy world. Usually with an intuitive or disciplined spiritual insight, they envision alternate pathways that are not immediately obvious to the rest of us. When viewed from more conventional standpoints, these visions seem idealistic or fantastical when described, and seem miraculous when achieved. And then the fourth, mystery, peace, and trust. While much development in the other facets has to do with increased knowledge and mastery of confident acting in the world, this fourth facet has more to do with not knowing and with letting go. This is the facet that is founded on the acceptance of contradictions and paradoxes. In place of certainty and objectivity, there is living wisdom and trust. Another way of looking at these facets of spiritual development is that each one of us represents a different experience of God, or whatever becomes the center of our attempts at finding meaning. I thought that these kinds of differences also might represent the faces of God, so that's where the title of the talk came in, that at each stage, each facet of life, stage, see how that word slipped out? During each facet, God will look different to us. It's a different face of God that we will interact with. That makes the most sense to us in the different stages that we're in. If you look at the top there, you'll see some of the ways in which I understand facets to be different than other understandings of stages. So I think of them as being always simultaneously present, even though one or two takes the stage at any given time. So that might be for a day, it might be for a couple of years, but then another facet will take its place. I'll use a Mac reference, and those of you who know me will realize the graciousness with which I it's like, the bottom of the Mac, how when you move your thing along, one becomes big and takes the center stage for a while. It's like that. But I believe they're unpredictable and repeating, so you might go 1, 3, 4, 2, whatever. Anyway, you might dance all around and double back and anything else in terms of which facet is important at any given point. But I also think that they're linked together, that anytime we mature, anytime we go deeper in one particular facet, it'll make it a little easier to go deeper or mature in another one of the facets. So they're all kind of linked together and draw each other along. Now, in the midst of my trying to get my head around these emerging ideas, I got on a plane heading from Boston. Was it Boston to Bogota? Is that where we went from?
We went to Bogota. I have no idea where we went from.
Anyway, some city.
Some city somewhere.
York. Was it York?
Oh, it was Newark.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it was, Newark to Bogota. Anyway, for some absurd reason, this United Airlines plane, they made us pay if we wanted to watch movies. Who ever heard of such a thing? It's an 8-hour flight. It's just ridiculous. So here I am on an 8-hour plane with no movies, because I wasn't going to pay $7 to watch on a plane. That's ridiculous. So in a very strange burst of creativity, I ended up writing what I refer to as a prayer poem in the fly leaves of a Walter Wink memoir. So I was reading this book on the plane. So here it is. You can see. I had to really write tiny to get it in there because it was the only paper I had. And I just kept on going. It was a really weird little burst of creativity, and it's a little different now than it was there, but close. And I was trying to do a couple of things as I was doing this. I wanted it to be a real prayer, so I wanted it to be something I was actually wanting to express to God in that. But I also wanted to, in the different sections of it, to be speaking from the different parts of me that related to the different facets that I've been thinking about. So that's what it is. And so if I'm listening to this kind of thing myself, I find it very, very difficult without having words in front of me. So I thought I'd let you have this. So probably the two people here who might ever follow my blog might have seen this before, but this will be a little different. Not much. This is almost the same as that. So this is a prayer that I wrote in the plane on the way down to Bogota, and I call it a prayer poem not because it's particularly poetic, but just because I was trying to be a little intentional in the way I wrote it. So the numbers represent the different facets. God of sowing and reaping, you created a universe of order and chaos with terrible beauty, and it is very good. All things are working together, but it's a wild mess. Death and life entwined, your blessings raining on the just and the unjust. We reap the fruit of our labors, our loyalty, our generosity, sometimes. We feel the pain of our mistakes, our laziness, our abuse of others, sometimes. That may be enough for the wise to discern the connections, but not enough for those who can't or won't pay attention. Certainly it's not enough to protect you from our hatred, sometimes. So, Creator of the universe, of all goodness and beauty, forgive us when we see you as monster, or call you the enemy, the accuser. God of forgiving and loving, you run to us with open arms at our slightest turning and throw a party. You invite us to sit like children on your motherly knee, perfect acceptance and safety. If you're on our side, who can be against us? We see ourselves completely new. Our shame recedes. Some days we could almost dance naked back in the garden. But a safe home has walls, and walls that protect are still walls. If you're on our side, who is on the other? How do we leave a home so warm? Would you push us out of our nest? How can this be you who tells us to hate the metaphor you chose to wear, O Father and Mother of ours? God of crying and laughing, of things turned upside down, you impregnate humanity with your heart and soul and mind, offering the poor and forgotten this meekly potent human child. Crazy genius God, you fill this child with riddles and stories that twist and turn. He becomes the leader who fails miserably while inspiring, inspiriting the world. He breaks down the walls of the house, inviting every loser he can find, the lost, the shamed, the greedy, violent, and afraid. Don't you know when to quit? He even invites the strong, saying, come and die, and the rich, saying, give it all, then weeps because he knows his wine looks like water to the rich and strong. God of imagining and trusting, what is this absurd human child saying and doing? On the way to failing and dying, he speaks out the impossible, and it happens. He teaches us to mourn while saying we can ask for anything. Do dreams and words and hope really heal? Do love and trust banish demons? Stopping storms, raising the dead, whole systems, the way everything works, change for this human child. How far will you stretch our belief? And he doesn't let us sit and admire from a distance. Do even more, he says. Get creative. He is wonderfully, maddeningly nuts. Fail gloriously like I did, he invites. It's like he thinks we are all divine. And yet, millennia later, we see the evidence of failing to stay dead. We see him everywhere. We believe. Help our unbelief. God of hiding and seeking, of nowhere and everywhere. God without a face, without metaphors of ways higher than ours, higher than our ways. We think we catch a glimpse and then come crashing down, hands empty, lost in fog. Is this the only way you can be big enough for us to stay small? Small enough for us to grow big? Can we breathe you in every breath? See you in the dark? Touch you when we're alone? Hear your music in the silence? Can this be enough? Must you be faceless to be enough? So that we see you in every face, every drop of water. So, anyone have any questions they would like to ask? There is, if anyone wants the long version of this, it will be in a journal coming out in the fall. You can tell the length of a journal title is inversely proportionate to its significance. So, so this is going to be in a journal called the Journal of the European Christian Movement for Anthropology, Psychology, and Psychotherapy. So if anyone would want to see a copy of that, you're welcome. Yeah.
So, the metaphor of the mosaic is meant to depict the fragments that formerly were described as stages, but to show the complexity of them?
No. I didn't actually think of connecting the idea of the stages with the fragmented pieces in the mosaic. The metaphor of the mosaic is just to show the nature of what I'm describing as maturity. So, so the two dimensions of the theory, that's the one that's I try to avoid language that makes it sound linear, but it's directional. So it's the one that is growth, but it's not like a linear growth, but emerging growth in different ways, but held together. All those different kinds of growth are held together with integrity. So it's the sense of separate pieces that keep their integrity, and simultaneously the whole that has its integrity. But the pieces don't coincide with the facets. But I can see how that would sound like it with them.
But still, it feels a little fixed.
Yeah. In what sense?
Well, it feels like, okay, so this is maturity. It's the pieces are held together by integrity, but it's one thing? Or is that just a limitation of the metaphor? Like I was thinking maybe a kaleidoscope would be...
So that it's more living?
It's more living, but even that's misleading maybe because it doesn't allow for new pieces, new fragments to come in.
Yeah, I need a better metaphor to get that organic growth sense.
Yeah.
Keeping like a mosaic. Who's got a sci-fi mind? A mosaic being.
Yeah.
Someone can handle that. Yeah, Patina.
Maybe a garden of like wildflowers.
Oh, nice. A garden of wildflowers. I like it.
Grow in, and some things are dying, always true.
Yeah, Joe.
You can just use a couple scenes from 2001: Space Odyssey.
Yeah.
Not the space baby. No, not the space baby. Rachel.
So I really liked the idea of the facets rather than stages, and them being, one being taking centre stage, them interacting and stuff. I noticed though that the 1, 2, 3, 4 seem to still reflect a movement that we see in stage theories. Because you could have put number 4 as number 2 or number 1 at the end, but they still are ordered in a way that is similar.
Right.
So do you see any directional movement towards that last one in your thinking?
Yes and no. I definitely would give a nod to I mean, there's obviously when you have, like Fowler's theory has been around for a long time, and the various versions that are like it, they've proven valuable, and I would never want to pull the rug out from under that purposefulness. And I do think there is a general drift downward, but I also think there's all kind of moments of mystery, peace, and trust that make sense of a elementary school, so I think there are moments that are best fitting in that facet very early in life. There are moments that are from the top that would fit very much in adolescent life and later again and again. And I just think The spiral, like you saw on the other model, I would like it, but a spiral it's like you keep going round and round the same loop, right? I mean, the same order. So that's the problem with that metaphor, right? So I don't want these to seem spiral, that they always come in the same order. So I want it to be more random.
And the moral of the story is, see, you don't need movies on an 8-hour flick.
Thanks, Becca.
Well, yes, we're reading a book lately. It talks and presents yet another model. But one of the interesting things, it talks about states rather than stages. This idea that, which is another nice word because you can sort of catch yourself as you're saying stage. You can switch to the stage while you're saying it, or claim that you said state when actually you said stage.
Even better.
But this idea that somehow there is this sort of there's a sort of flux. There's sort of this quantum kind of mechanical thing where you're sort of could move between any of those states even in an instant. Right. So that's not, and even though in this particular model there is again a sense of progression or hierarchy or certain states being higher states than others, but also recognizing there's not necessarily anything wrong with any of those states, even though what you would say that maybe one's higher than the other. And the last thing I would say, one of the interesting things I found about models like this one, and as they talk about in this book, because there's this complexity that you talked about.
Yeah.
Of course, the model is to reduce complexity. Right? That's the point of it. Right? You want to make it comprehensible and you want
to add integrity.
Yeah, to add integrity. Yes, you want to hold it together somehow right? But you inevitably lose something, right? It's like lossless, the MP3 very popular as a music format, right? But audiophiles don't like it because in the compression from the full you lose and you can't get it back.
Yeah.
Once you have taken that sort of raw state, say like a FLAC file format, and you put it down to MP3, you've lost information you can never retrieve.
Right.
So it's one of the dangers of the model, basically, that you just throw stuff away and you can't get it back.
No, it's true, but no one seems to think it's of much value when you just say everyone is a completely unique individual hero. It's like, all right.
What do you do after that?
Yeah.
I like what Rick's saying too. I think state is a good word. Like I think Nevada would go number 1. maybe Alabama was number 2. Georgia. Number 3 could be New York.
New Hampshire.
And number 4 could be not New Jersey.
California. Mystery, peace, and trust.
Berkeley. Yeah, there's one thing, like in the linkness, it's not completely absent of any of the idea of, there's also no point if you lose any sense of one person being more developed than the next, right? But by complexifying the issue, it makes it harder to be labeling and categorizing of that difference. So that's why it's very intentional that the directional piece is one big blob of complexity held together by integrity, whereas the other one is in the states or facets or stages or themes or whatever. Yeah. What I would say is we can never become really mature unless we have grown in all of them, right? Like we have to be making some level of movement in all of them. You can't leave any of them out. But I'd say that just as much about earlier, the lower numbered ones on my list. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned that it'll be the larger work will be published in that journal with a long name, which makes me want to ask you this question: as you do this work, who is your audience? I mean, is it your students at SSU? Is it academics in your field? Is it your clinical practice? Is it all of those? Like, who's the audience for this work?
Definitely. Students in my class are obviously going to be a captive audience. So I did inflict this on the developmental psychology students, and they helped me write that article actually by giving feedback on an earlier version.
Yeah.
But it would be, like say Fowler's work, it would be kind of a work for people who are helping to, like working in churches, who are trying to help people understand that faith is not static, that it does develop in different ways, and there's different aspects of it that are important in different times of our life and so on.
A lay audience or a professional?
Well, it depends how it would be communicated.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, you know, my training has been in practical theology largely, and some of you have heard me say before it's a big oxymoron, because if you've ever read much practical theology, you'll know it's incredibly impractical to read. And some of the stuff, well, I guess it's not really practical theology, but some of the psychology that I read, which are these complexity theories and nonlinear dynamics, good night. Like, it's just miserable stuff to read, because they're trying not to do what Rick's talking about, right? They're trying to talk about it without simplifying the complex, and so it's incredibly complicated stuff to read. Mostly I read it and I go, see, because they're talking about what I'm talking about somehow.
You talked about throwing some of this out in a developmental psychology class,
Mm-hmm.
and Fowler's stages, I think, are roughly based on a growing person's stages too, right? So I think, does that not reflect that negating any kind of flow or order at all is that might not be the most helpful? Like, if it's reflective of something, then
right.
I think even an order,
right? And I
would
don't.
be,
I really don't want to negate Fowler. I'm just saying we have to grow beyond Fowler. And Fowler's theory, I think when he wants to make that invariant sequential hierarchical thing work, he does it by leaning on the cognitive development. But once you get to age 12, 13, all of those things break down. So those people who have looked at his theory afterwards and assessed its accuracy and stuff basically say, until it gets to that age, it works. After that, no, but there's nothing else out there. So, there's no question that there's some things just cognitively that are going to change, and he tries to build those into his stages. But then he also tries to say that a lot of people don't get beyond stage 2 or 3 in adulthood. So that means you have 3/4 of his theory referring to adult change, which is not consistent and isn't borne out by the research on his theory either. So,
there's a lot of similarities between the Fowler stages and the stages of moral development.
Yeah.
Would you say that this kind of facet model could be applied to that as well, or?
Yeah, and like the one, did I cut off part of your question? Yeah. The one bit of research that I didn't want to get too bogged down in heavy academia in the article that's going to come out later. But the one bit that I did lean on was research into moral development that talks about if you look at what people are thinking during supposedly different stages of moral development, it's very much like that what I was giving with that Mac metaphor. Like, there's a little bit of a highlighting of one stage, but there's all kinds of thoughts or questions that sound like the earlier stages or the later stages in a person's life. So it's almost like an average of where they're at matches the stage, but their thinking is all over the map at any particular point. So we're not neatly thinking stage 4-ish thoughts at age 15. We're thinking all over the map, but maybe a little more stage 4-ish thoughts or something.
I think one of the ideas behind the model that I was reading about was this idea there is a sense, even without one, of sort of a hierarchy, if you will, or higher states. But this idea that it takes energy to get to the higher state, so that and the energy enough to do that in that sort of higher order state, it's easy. Gravity and other quantum effects would you most easily fall down through the states. So you sort of can, in the higher states, if you will, you call them states, you can sort of stay there for shorter times because of the energy and effort it takes to be there, and so because there's sort of, and then there's sort of the gravitational pull is trying to pull you back down through them, right? right?
Yeah, I
So
don't
you sort
know
of
if I
spend
would-
more time in the lower ones. In that cycle, in that state cycle, you tend to spend more time in the lower ones. Anyway, that was their sort of idea.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, anyway.
Yeah, I wonder. I do think like in the maturity integrity thing, complexity integrity thing, that the complexity actually happens without much energy. Like it just happens to us, and the integrity is the thing that takes work. So and that's why I think fear and laziness, just like Scott Peck always said, are the two enemies of maturity, because of that we won't look at the different pieces coming in and we'll deny them and shove them off or fragment. Yeah, Mike.
Can I suggest that this is the reason for the Book of Psalms?
This is the reason for which one?
If there's any part of the Bible that supports what you're saying, it'd be the Book of Psalms.
Oh, yeah, boy, there'd be a lot of those variety of pieces in there. Yeah, and the wisdom literature, I think, too. I used to love but have trouble making sense of some of the wisdom literature, and then I could finally come to love Job. Still had trouble with Ecclesiastes. Now I'm starting to really like Ecclesiastes. So I don't know.
Maybe they reflect
JJ?
No,
I just wanted to comment on what Rick had said. Suffice to say, I've met some neuroscientists in my work, and so this one guy has studied Tibetan monks while they meditate, and so he was studying particularly the patterns in the brain on focus, and so he would teach like a layperson, who didn't meditate, how to meditate, and then put them in the MRI, and found that their focus wasn't very good. Those who had meditated over like 10,000 hours in their life, the effort it took increased, but they could sustain that focus for a lot longer. They were very skilled.
Right.
But then those who had done like over 40,000 hours of meditation in their life, the effort went down. So the effort that that it took them to hold focus, because they had spent this entire life training themselves in their minds, the effort was actually quite little.
In that's
that
great.
Scientific measurements.
So that's a nice thing to hold in tension with what Rick was saying before. There could come a point, because of the discipline and the practice that a person's built into their life, that it almost gets easier to stay.
Yeah, you don't so easily fall down.
Yeah.
But you put a lot of effort to get out there.
Yeah.
Right? In terms of the 40,000 hour thing.
It's almost like disciplines would be good for us.
Could be. Whatever.
Because even when Malcolm Gladwell talked about this, the thought was that the 10,000 hours to become an expert in any field meant that you were making changes in your brain.
Yeah.
So that's
and that's an interesting one too, for the universality of because Fowler tried to make his theory universal, and most people have since, but of course he did it as a Christian, and 3/4 or more, probably 90% of his participants in his research were Christians. But one of the things that same study showed was they also did nuns in a convent, and showed identical parts of the brain that were stimulated and active when they had mystic moments of unity and prayer as the Tibetan monks did. So that would suggest that something similar is going on in a lot of different traditions in terms of faith development. Yeah?
Just another thing about what Rick was saying. I think last year in the Scientific American, they published a study about quantum gravity. And on a quantum level, gravity looks entirely different. And is, they say you can actually visualize it as an incredibly multifaceted geometric shape that has, all the facets working at once, irreducible to any given number.
Yeah. Do you remember learning chemistry in elementary school? And do you remember those diagrams of, there would always be those lovely molecules, and there'd be a nucleus, and then this electron zipping around in a very nice oval. It's not even close to true, right? So, but No, it's just a random, I guess random is the word. It's a probability of where the electron happens to be at any given point in time in relationship to the nucleus, but it could be going in any particular pattern. So that whole quantum theory is related to some of this complexity theory and nonlinear dynamics. We're just not that predictable in any sense, people or electrons.
I feel like you were pointing at something else, which I liked, which was in allowing for some of the complexity and maybe trying to remove some of this like hierarchical nature is like this relationship between the maturity and the integrity. So like resources, like you said, like if someone is trying to become too complex for what resources they have,
Right.
that's actually not growth.
Right.
And someone
And
who
not good
has-
for us to do,
To try to help them.
to try to help them.
Right.
Yeah. Sorry.
Right, and someone who has filled out with complexity maybe the space that they can reach at the moment. It's like, I think it's comparatively a lot more generous and like gives space for people's individuality and where they're at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah. Lois. And we should probably stop after that. Yeah.
Okay, I'll be quick. Just the words, like when Jesus said something like, unless you become like little children or so what are little, in terms of this, like
Yep.
I think sometimes we assume that focus is a good thing, but maybe focus isn't a good thing. Like maybe these all existing at the same time seems childlike. Like children are this way. And so I think we have a tendency to aspire to something higher than that or better than that. And so we'll attach labels and we'll say, well, focus is a good thing, and if we practice, if we meditate and become able to focus more quickly. But I think that may be an unhelpful assumption, and that we should constantly come back to, what is it about childlikeness that's not the enemy of faith?
Oh, I really like that, and I resonated right away with one thing you said, which is I bet for children, they're probably dancing around between these facets way more quickly than we would. We would probably stay in one of them, highlighting one longer, because they'll contradict each other, and we won't like that contradiction so much, so that makes us stick with one a little longer until it gets us in trouble or gets us stuck or something. Whereas kids probably, it's like, this is exactly the way it is, and the next minute they're just dancing in the opposite thing without caring.
The dirt.
Yeah, eating the dirt, yeah. Although their mom told them not to. All right, thanks so much for the questions. It's wonderful to hear them. Thanks. So the main event is coming. So I think they were